Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. It is May 14th. I am your host, as always, Tommy Brzee, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking a little bit about the Ohio State AD. He had some pretty aggressive words to talk about Michigan and their sign stealing scandal from 2023. Then we'll get into my post-spring top 25. I went through, did the top 25. I'm going to do 25 through 11 in one segment, and then we'll get to the top 10 in the second segment of this portion. Definitely a tough thing to put together, a ton of teams that can go anywhere between 15 and 25, so it was definitely very, very tough, but then we'll jump into some QB battles. There's still a ton out there that we want to definitely keep our eye out on. I have 4 in particular that I want to watch very, very closely. Then we'll get into a transfer portal update at the very end of the show. Still some players out there that definitely are some big-time guys that could change teams for 2024. So definitely want to break those down at the very end. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, or you can just ask something either you're wondering about. You can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to have a kind of fun, interactive experience here, and I think it's fun for all of us. So let's jump right in, and let's talk about this Ohio State AD comments that were made on Central Ohio's NPR affiliate. He was talking about Michigan and the recent sign stealing scandal and everything around that rivalry, really. And he basically said that all of the wins from a year ago should have an asterisk next to them. He said, of course they should, in fact. And I think that's something that a lot of people in college football, especially fans, tend to believe. He said, the rules are in place to protect the integrity of the game and try our best to create a level playing field. When the rules are violated, it affects those principles. We have to keep that in perspective. And that's a fair gripe, honestly. I mean, when you look at what happened last year with Connor Stallions and this huge sign-stealing scheme that was going on with Michigan, it definitely throws a cloud over what they did a year ago. I'm not here to say, they unequivocally did everything wrong or they unequivocally did everything right or anything in between, really. I'm just mainly saying I think this obviously does kind of lessen this a little bit, not necessarily ruin it by any means. Whenever you win a national title, go 15-0, do the things that Michigan did a year ago, it's not necessarily something you got to worry about too much, but it definitely does, to the rest of college football and the fans in particular, put a little bit of a cloud over this entire situation. Now, as for the sign stealing scandal, there's still a lot to be uncovered. We'll still figure out a lot of the details. From where I was sitting, it felt like a competitive advantage was gained throughout that time, but at the end of the day, they continued to win after Connor Stallions was off the staff. Now, I do still have some questions about what his involvement was when he was on the staff, who he was fully in contact with and who he wasn't, and also what happened after he left the staff, because if a guy like that, as we've heard the stories about Connor Stallions come out, absolutely loves Michigan football to no end, I'm not sure he would necessarily stop if he was just out of the building. So I think there's a lot of interesting things that I would love answers to. I don't necessarily think that anything has come out as of right now that makes me think that there was this huge advantage gained. Now, I do think there was somewhat of an advantage gained over the last couple of years, but I also think when you look at Michigan a year ago, that's just a really good football team. I think no matter how you cut it, that's a really good football team, and they definitely, benefited from this type of thing, but I'm not necessarily as ready to say as some other people are that last year essentially meant nothing because of this scandal. But getting into kind of all of this kind of sparked something in me yesterday, and it's something that I've kind of want to touch on here for quite some time, and it's just rivalries in college football and the energy we put around them. Gene Smith is a great example of this. This is an awesome thing to do, and I understand that it's a little bit petty, it's a little bit, childish, but that's what it's all about, right? You got to be throwing shots at your opponents and your rivals especially, anytime you can get the chance, right? You got to be going after him. You got to be saying stuff like this, and especially if it was something like this that happened at Michigan, you got to come after him pretty aggressively. And Gene Smith, especially with him handing the keys off to Ross Bjork in July, he's got nothing to lose. He's just kind of hanging out, continuing to have one of the best athletic departments in the entire country, as he has pretty much since he showed up in Columbus. But it's one of those things that we need more of that energy. We just do. We saw it last year with Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day. There is a little bit of aggression between those two, being born on third base, with Jim Harbaugh saying that about Ryan Day, and Ryan Day following up suit and talking about all the sign stealing and everything like that. That is the perfect energy for all of these games. That is the energy we absolutely need. I hope Sharon Moore is as in on that as Jim Harbaugh was, because did not shy away from talking bad about Ohio State by any means, and no one should. I think that's the overarching thing that I want to say here is college football, one of the great things about it is the rivalries. In my opinion, it might be the best thing about college football is the rivalries and the waking up next to someone, your neighbor is a fan of the other team that you're playing today, and you guys have a fun wager on the game. It's just little things like that make this sport so special. And the best part about that is it doesn't just happen on the football field in the fall, right? These teams aren't just battling for, 4 hours on a Saturday in September. They're battling year round, whether that's through recruiting or whether that's stuff like this, just taking shots at each other at different times, or a number of different things, portal recruiting. All of this stuff makes you rivals from, 365 days a year. And I think it's something that kind of is going to become more and more in the forefront of this sport, because as you move over to the SEC with Texas and OU joining, you add the Texas and A&M rivalry back. I think you're going to get a ton out of things like Oklahoma and Tennessee and Oklahoma and LSU. I think they're going to go at it. Also, Oklahoma, Missouri is a totally different discussion. That one's going to be as aggressive as any of them. But I think you're going to get some of these rivalries not only back with Texas and A&M, but also some new ones that are going to pop up. And I want that hate back, that unadulterated hate that I felt like has kind of waned just a little bit over the last couple of years, where it feels like coaches are just a little bit too chummy with each other, a little bit too friendly in the pregame. The players, trading jerseys after the game. I don't love that. I want these guys to hate each other 365 days a year. Now, I don't want them to go out there and, be too aggressive and hurt anyone or do anything like that. But you do want that energy. You do want that hatred to a certain extent. And I think the perfect example was there was an interview recently with Steve Sarkisian. He was asked about the A&M rivalry coming back, and he was asked specifically, a lot of the kids that, are in the program right now either grew up a little bit after the heyday of that rivalry and don't really fully understand it, and obviously came into Texas well after that rivalry was a thing. So he was basically asked, how do you get that energy for the game that some of these kids don't necessarily consider as big of a rivalry as others? How do you get that hate in those guys' heart? And Sark said, it's not hard at all. We'll be ready. So it's just kind of that energy like, yeah, A&M's easy to hate. And that's the energy that Texas, the head coach of Texas, should have 365 days a year. It's the same thing with Mike Elko. I want him saying the same things about Texas and taking the little shots and being a little petty at times. I know it's a little childish, but it makes those games so much more fun. I think when you get on the field and you know that there's something more behind it than just winning a game or maybe lifting a trophy at the end of it, there's literal hate between specific guys on each roster. It's incredible. You don't want these guys getting out and, getting a little too aggressive or getting too big for their britches by any means in this kind of world. But at the end of the day, I want a little bit more. I want a little bit more, Twitter beefs between these guys and a little bit more hate going back and forth. And once they step onto that field, them not just, want to go win a game to keep their playoff hopes alive, but want to go win a game because they want to just straight up beat the team in front of them. They want to batter them for 4 hours and walk out winning that game. All they need is that dub. They don't care about any of the outside stuff. They just want to beat the team because they hate the team in front of them. I think that's an incredible thing, and it's something that, players still take a good part in. You see that trash talk before games start and all of that type of stuff, but I love seeing an AD do it. I got to be totally honest with you. I know they're supposed to be, the adults in the room and they hold higher positions and have to hold themselves to a higher standard, but get in the mud a little bit. Join the rest of us and get a little bit aggressive towards your counterparts. And I hope it's something that Ross Bjork keeps doing. I hope it's something that ADs around the country do a little bit more often, and other people, in positions where you have to be a little bit more diplomatic. Well, you don't got to be that diplomatic when you're talking about your rival, because all you're going to do is gain brownie points with the fan base. So I think it's going to be one of the fun things to watch, is just how all of these things develop over the next little bit. I think things are going to get a little bit more intense, right? You're fighting over spots that you used to not be able to fight for in the playoff, where a Penn State game against, Michigan State or whoever it is becomes that much more important, because you want to get into that dance, and maybe that'll generate a little bit more hate in these games and generate a little bit more energy, because I think we can all agree when people come out of the locker room, run out of the tunnel, and then they meet each other at half field, and you have to keep them apart, and then the game finally starts. It feels like there's just more juice to that. It feels like there's just more to that, and there's more energy behind those games, and that's what college football is about. That's what football is about in general. It is controlled aggression for 4 hours, and the best way to do that is to come in kind of with your hair on fire and then dial it back slowly. So hopefully, you never want any injuries. You never want people going out there trying to do anything aggressive, but you do want them going out there with a little bit of hate in their heart, a little bit of genuine hate in their heart for the people across the way, just because of the jersey they're wearing. So I want more of this. Huge shout out to Gene Smith for getting that energy out there, starting this early. And I hope when Ross Bjork takes over, he is definitely about this, because that's what college football is all about. Just that little pettiness between some teams, and definitely some aggression between those teams in particular. But we'll break down all of this as it happens. Hopefully we have some more stories about this type of thing. But we're going to take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about my post-spring top 25. We're going to do 25 through 11. And then we'll get to the top 10 in the following segment. But tons of teams that are right in that 15 to 25 mark that are really, really hard to order. But I did my best, and I felt like I got a pretty good list here. So definitely stick with us, and we'll break that down right after this.